Alrighty, we are here with Scott Dikkers, aka the Dick Man, as he preferred to be called. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sure you've gotten that a million times, and really, really excited for this one. It's something I've been looking forward to for a long time. One of the founders of The Onion, one of the most influential and factually correct publishers of all time, but also How to Write Funny. You got some really, really cool books and kind of carved your niche in the comedy writing and comedy space. Scott, thank you so much for joining. How you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on your show. I'm excited about it. We're going to talk. We're going to talk business. We're going to talk growth. Right? It's going to be wild. Right?
Exactly. Awesome. And it's a podcast, so we're just covering all terms here. So we're going to start with our onion tasting section, where I have sent you an onion in the mail, and from there we're going to peel it back. No, I'm just kidding. No, actually, before we get to the onion, I have to start off by saying I am starstruck, and not just by you and your prowess, but also as prep for this, I was listening to one of your podcasts, and you've interviewed some very, very well-known and cool people in the space. And the one that almost brought a tear to my eye with sadness and laughter was your interview with Bob Einstein, the late Bob Einstein, who I know growing up as Marty Funkhauser on Curb, but I think more people before that know him as Super Dave Osborne and from the Smothers Brothers and all that. And, rest in peace, just an absolute legend. But it's one of my favorite aspects of the power of podcasting is that, like, your interview, which I think was from 2015 with him, it felt like I was sitting there in the room with you guys, and you were just going back and forth, and he told some of his iconic jokes, and I just wanted to thank you for that. How was your experience recording that with Bob?
That was one of the few interviews that I did remotely. I would do almost everything in person in those days. I would show up at the person's house and set up the mics, or meet them at their hotel if they were traveling or whatever. And, I think he was just an old man living in his house, didn't like to leave his house. And he had a landline phone, so I just called his landline and recorded it.
Looked him up in the yellow pages.
I can't remember how I got in touch with him. That I don't remember. But yeah, I was a huge fan of his stuff. I always thought he was just like one of these comic minds that is underappreciated. It's partly because he hid behind Super Dave Osborne, never came out really as himself, like never did stand up. And he's Albert Brooks's brother, so Albert Brooks obviously much more famous. But yeah, just always thought he was so funny.
Debatable.
No, well, over time. But he was really funny because he could say, Scott, you got to do jokes. You're not doing enough jokes on your podcast. People don't want to listen to this. He thought nobody wanted to listen to the In the Weeds. And I tried to explain to him, that's old thinking. Like Steven Spielberg never did DVD commentaries because he didn't think anyone would care. My God, what people would have given to hear Steven Spielberg do a director's commentary on any of his movies. And he's done so many interviews, you could probably piece one together for every movie. But yeah, he was very confused by this idea of the internet age where there's hierarchies of information, and you want to give fans the deepest level of information to go to if they want to go there. He was still living in the old days of TV where, you show up, you do the joke, and you go home, It's funny.
Yeah, absolutely legendary. Those are some great lessons there too. At the time of this recording, I just got done watching Masters of the Air on Apple TV, which is like one of my favorite shows in recent history. And it's part of the production team behind it is Spielberg and Tom Hanks, and they also, in addition to the 9-part miniseries, they have an accompanying, which is not easy to say, 1-hour documentary. And it's narrated by Hanks, and then there's interviews with Spielberg in it. And even though all this history and the footage and all that World War II stuff is so cool, some of my favorite parts were just seeing the camera on Spielberg and just hearing him talk about these things in the personal story. Like people in this case, I mean me, like eat that stuff up. So that's absolutely spot on.
Yeah, I'm ravenous for stories that actors tell about working with Spielberg, because it's like the closest you're going to get to like, how is it like on the set with him? How does he work? Yeah. Don't,
Yeah.
but it was fun to get behind
So,
the scenes with Bob on comedy. He did end up, ultimately she showed up for that task, like talking about the process and stuff.
yeah, so totally. And some of his jokes never get old. On that note of interviewing some what I call pinch me moment people, um, who else is in addition to Bob, who's somebody that you've either interviewed or crossed paths with through your comedy and writing journey that afterwards you're like, holy cow, how in the world did I just have a conversation with this person?
Oh my God, there's so many. Gary Shandling, Chris Rock, Louis C.K., Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, some of the giants of comedy in the last generation. Bob Odenkirk literally stalked me at the Onion.
Wait, hold on. What do you mean by that?
He was an unknown actor at the time. He was on the Larry Sanders Show, and he was shooting Mr. Show, and he discovered the Onion, and he called and called and called, and wanted to tell me how great he thought it was, and invite me out to LA and have chicken and waffles with him and his buddies. That's what he does. Like, he finds people whose comedy he respects, and he gets real fanish about them. But like, he kept calling, and at that time, the Onion was really kind of becoming famous around that time, in late '90s, I would say. And we were getting so many calls and so many letters. I didn't know who it was. And every time he'd call, he'd try to give a little bit more identifying information to the receptionist or whatever. And one message, he finally mentioned that he plays a character on the Larry Sanders Show, Super Agent Stevie Grant. And I, of course, knew that show, loved that show, especially thought the Super Agent Stevie Grant character was amazing. And so called him back, and sure enough, he invited me out there, and I got to watch them shoot an episode of Larry Sanders. I hung out when they were shooting Mr. Show. We went to Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles and got chicken and waffles. It was, I met the whole cast and everything. He really gave me the star treatment. And then he and David invited me to this HBO party that had all these HBO celebrities there. Like, it was a real star-studded party or whatever. But yeah, a lot of the people I met, before they were really that famous, like Tina Fey had just gotten hired as the head writer of SNL when I met her, and Louis C.K. was going to possibly produce a show for the Onion. He had worked on the Dana Carvey show and was doing stand-up. That's about it. Amy Poehler, you could go see her at ASCAT every Sunday night at the UCB in New York. But yeah, those are some fun moments. And one of my favorites actually is Ellie Kemper, who came to work for us at the Onion, and also Connor O'Malley, I discovered his videos and invited him into the office just to meet him. He was so funny, and not surprisingly, he ended up. This is when we were in Chicago. He moved out of Chicago, went to New York, got hired on Seth Meyers, married A.D. Bryant from SNL, got a pilot for his own show, which was hilarious. Started doing these incredibly funny viral videos. I haven't seen one from him in a long time, but he used to pretend he was a Trump fan and show up at rallies. And then he ditched Trump for Howard Schultz when Howard Schultz ran. It was so funny. He was just such a brilliant performer. Like, you haven't seen that kind of like manic energy since like Belushi, or
Yeah.
Eric Andre, maybe just somebody like just crazy. So I'm still waiting for big things from him, even though he's doing great. Not to who he is.
Eric Andre is a whole that you need a lifetime of a podcast length to dissect Eric Andre. But no, those are incredible shout outs there. Crazy you mentioned Ellie Kemper, because literally at the time of this recording, My wife Dana and I started watching Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt last night.
Oh,
So we watched it and we spoke it into existence. So thanks for bringing that full circle. But
that's fun.
also with the Bob Odenkirk story, that's just legendary. I think if you add to your resume stalked by Saul, like you could get any gig ever. That just, who doesn't want to hang out with them?
Yeah, no, he's super fun.
So let's get to the Onion. And as everybody knows, it was named after the famous quote from Shrek about layers and ogres and onions and all. No, but I would love to hear your side of it. How did you get involved with this thing that would become the Onion one day in the first place?
Yeah, so I was a very well-known and successful cartoonist in Madison, Wisconsin at the UW campus. I had a self-syndicated strip, and I had T-shirts that everybody wore, and I had put out a book that made the New York Times bestseller list. And these two guys who were starting this humor publication wanted me involved because I was like the local, newspaper comedy celebrity. And I helped them. I came up with a bunch of different comic strips for them. And then I started helping them out around the office around issue 3 and helping them write, come up with ideas in addition to my cartoons. And then a few months into it, they offered to sell it to me. And I bought in with a couple of other partners. We all had an equal share. We ended up buying out the third partner a couple of years after that. And so, yeah, from year 2, I was owner, editor, and that's how I got involved.
So you got a big chomping bite of the onion early on.
Yeah.
Did you go in
So
with the
today
intention that I'd like to take it over one day?
no, I just thought it was fun. But it's funny because today, as we're speaking, some investor just bought the Onion again, and all these, like, who knows who they are, like Silicon Valley investors are spending tens of millions of dollars selling and buying the Onion, and I bought it for $3,000 in
Buy low.
1989. Yeah.
Well, with inflation, that's about 6 trillion that you bought it for, so that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So, in those early days, what was kind of the vision for what the Onion strove to do, if strove's even a word?
It is. And a lot of the early vision was from Tim Keck, one of those two guys I mentioned, who was trying to parody like a mid-sized town's newspaper and also maybe parody USA Today. But we really fell pretty quickly into the arena of making fun of the grocery store tabloids, not the celebrity ones, but like the freakish ones with like the Weekly World News and the Globe that were black and white, and they would have the Bat Boy and stuff like that. A boy raised by bats who took on bat characteristics or whatever, looked like a bat. We did a fair amount of that sort of stuff and always tried to put a really silly spin on it. And it wasn't until a few years in that we started doing more straight news parody, where we were playing it straight and pretending that it was all straight. We'd still do silly stories, but we just packaged it as more very serious AP style news. But yeah, we did a lot of other things besides that. We did like a lot of different wacky win a date with, some crazy person contest, a cutout game, but a bunch of big comic strips that really took over the paper. We really weren't sure what it was, other than we're just trying to be funny. We're just having fun. And that's a great process because every issue you just try to make it better than the last issue. And you kind of zero in on your voice. And then we finally found our voice and did a major kind of retooling right around 1995, where we made the whole thing look like a real newspaper from front page to the back page, so that if you picked it up and didn't actually read the words, it would look exactly like a real newspaper. We'd have a comic section, editorial page, the whole shebang. And we got rid of all the wacky, silly stuff. We used to have a feature called Drunk of the Week, where we would go out and take a picture of a drunk person on Friday night and feature them in the Onion and give them a certificate. And it was literally the most popular feature in the Onion. And when I decided to cut it, when we were doing this retooling, this refiguring this Onion 2.0 to make it look like a real newspaper, I got a lot of grief from the ad staff. You can't cut the most popular feature. And I was like, yes, I can. It had to go. It just had to go.
There's only so many people that can be drunks each week.
There was never a shortage. There was never a shortage. Always new people.
No, that would do really well on any platform, I think. Speaking of platform, so you mentioned like the newspaper format. What was involved over the years of like, as it became possible to have an online newspaper and social media, like how did you kind of navigate through that, wonderful craziness?
I wanted the Onion to be available in every media possible. So we immediately moved into media that was available to us. The first one we moved into was radio. Super easy. We partnered with a local radio station, started doing like a little Onion news bit, and then we started producing it on our own and syndicating it to stations all over the country. I know Howard Stern played it for a long time. And that was a great way for us to build the Onion's awareness of the Onion, was to get that radio skit everywhere. It was super funny too. It was like just like the super square sounding AM newscaster doing these really brief 1-minute Onion things. And they sounded like real news, And then we did the website. I think we did a TV pilot first. We're trying to get on TV. We did a comedy CD, and the internet was just like, one of our designers came to me and said, hey, we could put this on the computer and people could type in an address and they would find the Onion. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And it cost us $400 to get the domain, theonion.com, because they were just $400 then. And my partner didn't want to spend the money, which is pretty funny. And then we did a book, and then we started doing online video. We did a podcast. We did a movie. We did everything we could possibly do to get the word out. And it was always a matter of rethinking what the Onion was. We learned a lot of lessons from the TV pilots, those early pilots, and the early comedy CDs. We learned that we got to do what people expect from us. We got to be in our voice, and we have to totally change what we do to suit the rules of the new medium. You can't just take, for example, the newspaper and just put it on the radio. It's not going to work. You have to make it sound like a radio show. Same with all the other media.
So one of those aspects that I would think is pretty transferable among mediums, but it definitely can look a little bit different. One of the things that I instantly think of with the Onion is the headlines. So like the headlines for each article or post, however you want to view it, those are like, they're literally one-liners. Those are the real zingers. Those are the, you might think you're seeing it in like newspaper format, and then you see that and you're like, wait a second, that's where they really get you, or where you really get you. But what was the strategy in terms of crafting those headlines?
That was a whole process. So at first, the Onion wrote comedy the way that most short comedy was written up until that time, which was you assign a story to a writer, they write a story, and then you read it and you think, okay, this is pretty funny. Let's come up with a title for it and let's run it. That's kind of what we did, though maybe for some of the front pages, the headline came first. There was no real system. Eventually, I got this book called Information Anxiety, which is a great book that was all about the importance of the hierarchy of information. And there's so much information thrown at us every day. There's more information in today's New York Times than a person in the Middle Ages was exposed to in their entire lifetime. And so how do you manage that? How do you take all that in? And the guy who wrote this book was all about, well, you should produce a very short headline that gives you a brief synopsis of the information. Then you can do a subheadline, maybe a large print paragraph that gives you a little more information. And then you can have a deeper story if somebody really wants to go in the weeds on this and learn everything there is to learn about it. And it occurred to me that really is the way that a comedy article should be written. It should be a really funny joke that grabs you. And then if you decide to read it, you just get rewarded because it keeps getting funnier and funnier. Whereas the old comedy writing, like if you read the Harvard Lampoon or the National Lampoon or, Steve Martin's book, Woody Allen's books, Mad Magazine, they wouldn't have funny headlines necessarily. It would just like you'd have to trust New Yorker, good example. You start reading the article and you trust them because you figure, okay, they printed this, they must have thought it was funny. And by the time you get to the end, you might get a punchline. And the headline is a total afterthought. Just like, how are you getting readers that way? And part of it was that The Onion was unknown. The Onion was not a humor brand. Who's going to sit down and trust this thing and read it? We have to grab them immediately and put out a red carpet for them and coax them in. It's the only way we're going to get people to read it, which was really handy when we started, competing with 1 trillion times more information on the internet. Now it's like a really competitive space, and you'd better be compelling people to read or you're going to be lost. Nobody's just going to start reading a bunch of gray copy with no context.
So I think you're stalking me more than Bob Odenkirk stalked you, because the author of that book, Information Anxiety, Richard Saul Wurman, we actually had him on this podcast back episode 254.
That's crazy.
And yeah. And
that was a very influential book for me.
That's awesome. That's so cool to hear it come full circle. Yeah. Here's and I forget his birthday, but at the time of the recording, he was 88 years old.
I was going to say he's got to be a damned old man at this point.
Definitely the wisest guest that we've had on. But in terms of feedback for the episodes, it's really interesting because I don't know if you've heard interviews or watched interviews with him.
I've not.
He is so particular, so detail oriented, and also so kind of, I don't know, his way or the highway that he's a little rough around the edges. So that interview is kind of polarizing. Some people really liked it. I mean, he wrote all these books. He's created the TED. Like he's got an incredible story. But he also basically, when I start off the interview, just asked how he was today. He said, "That's a stupid question."
I'll have to listen.
Appreciate it. So shout out RSW. But that's a really brilliant strategy behind the headlines there. And in terms of growth and getting in front of more people, what do you think were the key inflection points in terms of growing the circulation, if you will, of The Onion over the years?
We got really lucky because we were published free on the street in Madison, Wisconsin. People who saw it and were inspired by what it could be would try to come and write for us, and so we had a lot of disaffected, smart, just really funny people who kind of banged down our door. And through a process of attrition, we collected this group of like the best and the brightest of them. And the material was just really, really good. And it kept getting better because we're all kind of obsessed with making it as good as we can be. So, some of our key writers like Todd Hansen and John Cruson and Rob Siegel, Carol Kolb, Maria Schneider, they were some of the early people who just nailed this amazing voice. And when I say voice, I don't mean like the fake news AP style. I mean like the soul behind that. They were able to encapsulate so much about modern American life. It was just like such a treat for them and such a lifeline for them to have this soapbox, And so they really cared and they really worked hard to make their stuff work. And that consistency of like continuing to produce that quality was a big help. the other thing that really helped us move the needle in terms of growing circulation and stuff was when we would get in trouble, when we would piss off the governor and the governor would threaten to sue, the local press would write about it, you know? And so we'd get these little write-ups, and we craved those things, you know, any kind of mention in the press or whatever. And I think our radio show helped spread the word. Like Howard Stern would play the skit, and then he would talk about how great the Onion was for a couple of minutes after the radio skit. When the internet happened, before the internet, people were emailing people stories that they saw in the Onion. They'd type them out and just email them with no attribution. And so one day on the NPR show Car Talk, they read one of our stories word for word, the whole story, and laughed and laughed and laughed, but they didn't know where it came from. It was just somebody emailed it to them. And they were like, I don't know who wrote this, but it's really funny. Anyway, we called them and told them that it was us. And so on the next show, they told everybody that it was from the Onion, that the Onion's super funny. And so those little like media hits, you know, where people discovered it. And then I think going online too was crucial, because we were the first humor website, and there were like 10 websites. So if you're going to go online, you're probably going to see the Onion. And my God, that was just like, what a once in a millennia opportunity to get in on the ground floor of just an explosive new media. Sheer luck, you know, not sheer luck. I mean, it was definitely the doggedness.
Unsheer luck.
Yeah, well, we were dogged enough to pursue it and get on there.
Yeah.
But, you know, you can't count on that kind of an opportunity. That was pretty damn lucky. And then so everybody's writing about us then. It's like we're the new kid on the block, and we have TV shows are coming to our offices to, you know, interview us, and we're in all the magazines and everything. And then the ad staff always pounding the pavement to sell ads, which is how we made our money. And the more popular we could get it, the easier it was for them to sell the ads, you know.
How does it feel to have that platform and be in a position where you're actually incentivized to like piss people off and draw more attention to stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we ever saw it as, hey, let's piss people off. We were just trying to be as funny as possible and try to make it really, really funny. And sometimes when you're funny, you're on the edge and you piss people off. And to us, it was always pretty amusing whenever somebody would get pissed off, because my God, it's just comedy. You know, we're just making fun. So that was what, you know, fueled me. And I think I can speak for everyone on the staff. It was just this goal of making it as funny as possible. It was really all we cared about.
So one of the themes, I just combined the words things and themes, which I'm just going to go to sleep now, but that has been instrumental to the Onion's success that you mentioned, is maintaining that emphasis on quality, maintaining that emphasis on humor. Like no matter what, even if you have a golden opportunity, you can grab a great, you know, website, you can be one of the first movers in something. It's not going to matter that much if you can't deliver on the content and the quality of that. So you and team nailed that out of the park. So I'd love to pivot a little to writing jokes and the actual writing of humor, writing funny stuff. You've, you know, as your personal brand, if we can call it, you've carved a niche in this space, which is really, really cool. You've got a best-selling book on it. And it's one of the most fascinating things that not as many people talk about. It's like, what actually goes into humor? Like what makes stuff funny? So to start off, what are some tips or kind of basic points you can share for writing a great joke?
Sure. So I just got done watching this CNN series about comedy, and it was really funny to hear they interviewed so many different comedians. This is like from about 5 years ago. And there was one episode where they asked them all, what's the difference between parody and satire? And they all pretended not to know. They all pretended to sort of make a joke about it, like they didn't know. And that's typically and historically what comedians and comedy writers do. They want to perpetuate this myth that it's a big mystery, that I don't know, I just, it just comes out of my head. And that always bothered me when I was starting out. I really wanted to know how you do it. And after my decades at the Onion, I felt like, okay, I know how to do it, and got a pretty good system. And I think I can explain to people how it works, and not just how to write an Onion story, but how to do any comedy, because so many people leave the Onion and they go off and they succeed in other fields, because the Onion is all about the fundamentals of comedy. It's just by happenstance that we're in this news parody format, that we're in prose, though obviously over time the Onion has done plenty of video and audio as well. So I wanted to write a book, and it's called How to Write Funny, and it's just the methods that you use to come up with comedy that works. And yeah, the main core of that are these tools, the 11 funny filters. I contend that there are really only 11 different things that make an idea funny, like professionally funny. When you hear it, you really realize, oh, okay, that is a joke. That is the language of humor. It is meant to be funny, and you usually laugh. Some people laugh at stuff like that as a knee-jerk reaction because they hear the language and like, ha. But obviously, you want the real laugh. You want the
that was a great fake laugh, by the way. You've nailed that as well.
Believe me, I can fake laugh with the best of them, because it's often the only kind you're going to get from me. But the way that those funny filters work to create professional humor is very simple. Part of it is, like I said, understanding the language of comedy and knowing that this is the language. Number two is using them in. They each kind of have different rules and best practices or whatever. So using them in the proper way, heightening them, using them turned up to 11, like the maximum amount that you can use, and then mixing them so that you don't just have like a one note idea or a one note joke. Your joke has layers, has different types of humor. Generally, it's going to be funnier because everybody walking around has a different sense of humor. They respond better to different funny filters. That's kind of what makes up your sense of humor. It's kind of like in D&D with the strength, dexterity, wisdom. We all have like a different level of each funny filter in our own personal sense of humor in our head.
Real quick on that, what do you think are like the biggest influences to crafting that? Like, oh, this person really likes puns. This person really likes dirty jokes. Like, what goes into that?
Like what goes into them developing those interests or those?
Yeah, like almost like our palate for humor.
You might as well be asking, like, how do you catch a rainbow? It's like, somebody grows up.
That was my next question, actually.
Yeah, they have their life experiences. They read this book or that book, watch this show or that show, and it's different as a fingerprint. Everybody's going to have a different makeup,
Okay, so I'm not going to make you reveal all 11 funny filters, but is there like just a couple that you could share with like a brief example of what that actually looks like or sounds like, actually?
Yeah, one of them that's really easy to understand is irony, where you just say the opposite of what you mean. Some people think sarcasm is irony, but it's not quite. Sarcasm is irony where you're revealing that it's irony. Irony is when you don't reveal that it's irony. You deadpan say the opposite of what you think, or write the opposite of what you believe. So that's pretty simple. Another one that I'm a big fan of is madcap, which is like wacky physical humor, funny voices, silly made up sounds, and any sort of pratfalling or things that you do with your body that are just crazy and wacky. Love that one. I think it's it's forgotten.
Is that slapstick? Is that the same?
Is what I would encompass slapstick in that funny filter. Absolutely.
Which of the 11? So you might even have to reveal another one. You never know. What do you think is most commonly used these days? Like at the time of this recording, the shows that are on TV, the shows that we're streaming, like what sort of comedy seems to resonate with people right now?
Well, the type of comedy that resonates with people is individual depending on the person. but there are certain trends in the different generations. And it's funny, I just wrote a piece about this today. The baby boomers really liked shock humor and political references, and Gen Z really likes madcap, non sequitur humor, particularly with very layered references, like deep, meaningful references, universal human foibles, references to other things in the culture, things like that. But a good show is going to pretty much use all of them.
And is there a typical amount of like, is there a sweet spot of like, if you use 2 or 3 filters, like this is going to crank out the Willy Wonka, everlasting gobstopper of jokes?
A great joke can have just one funny filter. A great joke can use all 11. It's there's no real quantifier involved. It's all sort of qualifiers, because like if you listen to a stand-up performance, for example, a stand-up bit might start with a reference joke. They'll bring up something in daily life that you've experienced, and you'll get a little recognition, and that'll be funny. And then they'll hyperbolize it. They'll exaggerate it for the next beat of the joke. Then they might do irony, and then they might do a character acting out something having to do with this thing. So they're just constantly, dialing a different funny filter, which keeps it funny and interesting. And some of their jokes are going to have many funny filters mixed in. Those are usually the ones that do the best because, like I said, you're reaching more people. You're reaching people who, maybe the only one you like is hyperbole. So if they never do hyperbole, you're going to be like, I don't like that comedian. But if they work it in once in a while, you're going to like that comedian.
What's your process for, I guess, gathering the intel for writing a joke that you think is at least satisfactory for your standards?
I have used many different processes over the years and decades. When I was editor of The Onion and I had to produce a lot of material, like every writer, including the editor, it comes to the weekly meeting with 25 ideas. You can't depend on inspiration, so you have to sit down at a blank piece of paper and just churn out the ideas, which is pretty brutal. Nowadays, I'm not on that kind of grueling treadmill, so my current method, which I really like, is whenever I think of an idea or notice something in the world that strikes me as funny, I just make a voice note on my phone. And then later I listen to those. And if I still think they're funny later, I'll put them in a document. I'll write them out. And then when it comes time to write a joke, I'll look at those and see if anything strikes me as good enough subtext or good enough observation to base a joke on, and then try to start incorporating the funny filters to work that into a joke.
How many drafts would you say one of your typical jokes takes?
Oh, it's impossible to calculate because you're constantly tweaking, constantly redoing, and how many drafts do you even do before it becomes a totally different joke? And then do those old drafts count? You're just constantly changing and warping. And sometimes you're not. Sometimes it comes out fully formed, so it's definitely a mix.
Do you see, and there's obviously a million different forms of comedy as well. And you're very, very familiar with the writing side of it, as well as the stand-up's a whole different animal. What's the main way that you think like preparation for writing, really funny long form content compares to like prepping for a stand-up routine?
It's a great question, and it really depends on the writer and the performer. Some writers, so everybody generally has a sort of mode that works best for them, that feeds their muse the best. Some people are performance based, so if they get talking, they're going to really zero in on the funny. Other people are more writerly, so they sit and they start typing, and that really helps them zero in on the funny. Sometimes some people can be both, but depending on what your style is, like there's no correlation. Like some people who are really performance focused end up being writers. And so their process might be to talk it out with somebody, and riff with somebody, then sit down and kind of type it out, articulate what they just came up with. There's a lot of stand-ups. George Carlin immediately leaps to mind, who later in his career considered himself a writer who performs his own material, as opposed to a comedian who writes his own material. He was primarily a writer. He wrote everything out and he memorized it like poetry and would recite it, and a lot of stand-ups don't do that. A lot of stand-ups write on stage. They go on stage and they just start talking to people, and then they discover what's funny there, and they work that into their bits. So that it runs the gamut, from all the way one way to all the way the other way.
So speaking of running the gamut, let's run our way to rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
Let's do it.
All right, let's get wild. Or as you said at the start, we're going to get businessy, we're going to get growthy, we're going to get podcast. No, I'm just kidding. Let's get wild.
We can do it.
What is the actual story behind the name, The Onion?
Tim and Chris, two guys who started it, used to eat raw onion on untoasted white bread for breakfast.
Wait, seriously? That's not a joke?
It's not a joke.
Wow. All right, fitting. All right, what is there a if you had to pick one, what is an article from The Onion in any era that was like very memorable for a specific reason?
It was an editorial by the CEO of the Gillette Razor Company, and the headline was "Fuck it, we're doing 5 blades." And it's one of my favorite stories, super funny. Recommend Googling it and reading it. And it's memorable because we thought it was hyperbole, but a few months later, Gillette unveiled the 5-bladed razor.
Wow. That's brilliant all around. Wow. that one really got me. All right. Who's we went through your gauntlet of celebrities at the start of this interview, but looking back to all the people you've met, who's somebody that you met in person who was like the funniest side-splitting laugh, like would just make the whole room crack up no matter what they did?
There's a couple. One is definitely Chris Farley, and another very similar character was a comedian by the name of Dave Gray, who was a comedian in Madison, and he won like the funniest person in Wisconsin competition a couple of times. He was a guy who just lived stand-up comedy. I went to see him perform, and he ad-libbed his whole act, improvised his whole hour, and it was just hysterically funny. And I ran into him on a plane once. We flew on a flight back to Madison one time, and he was cracking jokes on the plane to everybody on the plane. He turned the shuttle bus from the plane to the rental car center into his own comedy club and just entertained everybody on the bus. Just an incredible figure, but he died of epilepsy, unfortunately. Epileptic seizure, like around the year 2000, I believe.
Wow. Jeez, incredible. A lot of late legends we're uncovering here, but you got to love a comedy bus session. That actually my high school baseball coach tried to do that one time. It did not work. My baseball coach actually tried to do all the Dangerfield one-liners, and I think most of the baseball team was not familiar with Dangerfield at all, so it did not work. He did not get no respect. But if you could show one comedy movie, like the funniest movie you've ever seen, and broadcast it at the Sphere in Las Vegas for people to watch on that crazy screen, what would you choose?
That would have to be Airplane.
That is
funniest movie.
That's a classic.
Yeah.
more airplane stories. And then last one, if somebody asks you for just a one-liner or a quick dad joke, what's your go-to?
I have to pass because I hate the idea of dad jokes. It's such a cliche, and I'm going to pull what's his name from Information Anxiety on you and not do that one.
All right. Well, we start off with wonderful questions and end with stupid ones. Scott, thank you so much. This has just been awesome. Endlessly fascinated by what you do and everything with the Onion story, your behind the scenes joke story and beyond. Where is the best place for people to, if they want to connect and learn more about you online, or to grab a copy of one of your books?
Yeah, they can certainly grab my books. They can Google me in the computer. I show up pretty readily. Easiest place to find me nowadays is on Substack. I do a daily column with creativity, inspiration, and motivation, and I respond and engage with everybody who's on there, more than just about any other platform.
Perfect. And then last thing, final thoughts. Usually I ask guests for their second favorite dad joke, but I'm going to skip that one for now. But final thoughts. It could just be like a quote, one line, word of wisdom, whatever you want. Just bring us home here.
A quote, a line, a word of wisdom.
You nailed it. That's it.
Yeah, it's going to be real simple, and I'm just going to say have fun, because a lot of people are interested in comedy, and they maybe they want to do comedy. They think it'd be fun. They don't realize it's hard work, but it really should. You should do things that you think are fun. Don't do something that's painful or too hard. If it's too hard and you want to give up, you should just give up. I really think life is short, goes by really fast. We should enjoy what we're doing.
Bring on the bongos.